Hi, everybody. This is Lisa Benson from Bensons Boas, and I wanted to give you an update today about what happened with Batman. As some of you know, Batman and Bella have been in breeding trials since Thanksgiving, and we had a bit of an incident last week, which resulted in Batman needing surgery and having to interrupt breeding trials for this year. We hope that Bella has become gravid. We don't know for sure, but that's our hope. Batman has recovered successfully from his surgery. He's still in the process of recovery. He's getting antibiotic shots every 3 days through the end of the month. But let me tell you what happened. And, this might be useful for some, for some of you who are planning to breed in the future, as it is a risk that can happen. And I'll tell you what happened, how I discovered it, and how it was corrected. So they've been together and very actively courting and breeding and been in many locks since Thanksgiving. And let's see, I came downstairs on Wednesday morning, this was last week, came downstairs and found him in his water bowl, which was unusual. And when I looked at him, his hemipene was prolapsed. Was outside of his body, and it was, very visible, and he looked uncomfortable. And I immediately knew, that this was an emergency that had to be dealt with. The tissue looked healthy in that it was, even though it was very red, purpley red and swollen, it didn't look black or necrotic. It looked clean because he had, had it in the water bowl. So I decided at that point that I would immediately take action to try to, do something myself. And my backup plan was to get an emergency vet on call. So the first thing I did was remove him, from the breeding situation with Bella. And I took him out and I flushed his area, the cloacal area and the hemipene with warm water from a squirt bottle. So that's a good thing to have around. This was just a small squirt bottle that I could fill with warm water, and I put some betadine solution in it too. And I just used that to flush the area gently to get any kind of debris off of it. And then the next thing I did was I assessed, how the area looked. I didn't see any major swelling around the cloaca, just the hemipene itself. So I thought, okay, well, let's see if we can reduce some of the edema, and maybe, a little bit of a soak would help that. So I put him into a shallow bath of some warm, lukewarm water, and I let him sit in that for a good hour or so, monitoring him and refreshing the temperature of the water as time went on. But I didn't see any real significant change. I reached out to some friends, who have some experience with breeding to see if they had experienced something like this. None of them had directly. Some mentioned that taking some solution of sugar might help. Some said that they had heard that it was very tough to do this without a sedative because of the muscles. And I noticed this too, that the tissue was very engorged still. And with the tension he had in his musculature and the level of swelling, it didn't seem possible for me to replace the hemipene. I tried, pushing it back in with a Q-tip. I tried using some glycerin, which I had on hand, and none of that seemed to be doing the trick. So at that point, I did coat the hemipene with some preparation H. And I also happened to have that on hand. And I tried to see if that would both protect the area and also reduce some of the swelling. It may have reduced it a little bit, but not enough to make a significant difference. And at that point, I put in a call to a mobile exotics vet, which I am very fortunate to have in this area. And they were able to make it out here, which was a blessing. So they came out and evaluated him, and I'll show some pictures of when they were out here. The process of this happening is called paraphimosis, and it is not all that uncommon to happen in breeding males. Some of the reasons it can happen are just from traction. If the female moves while the male is locked, it can happen. It can also happen if there is matter, some sort of matter stuck in the cloaca, like a urate. It can also happen if there's some sort of inflammation or infection. None of this was the case with Batman. I suspect with him, it could have been just a size difference between him and the female. She is quite a bit larger than him, and perhaps, with the amount of breeding he had been doing, or, perhaps that she is, at the point where she is, ready to be done because she may be gravid, that she moved at a critical point and left him, in a compromising position. And at that point, he got stuck. So anyway, at that point, the tissues just become injured and stuck out. And it really is a veterinary emergency at that point. So at that point, the vet suggested that we could try to sedate him, which would relax the muscles in his cloacal area, and that might help us get the tissues back in. So we did, and sedating a boa is an interesting process because, they have a slow metabolism being cold-blooded animals. So, they go down pretty heavy. And, when he was sedated, it was basically, he almost seemed like he wasn't alive. It was a little worrisome. But while he was sedated, she was able, with some lubrication and an assistant to hold the cloaca open, she was able to manipulate the hemipene back into his body and throw a suture in, a purse loop suture, which was hopefully going to hold the hemipene in place until the swelling could go down. And then, we would take that out in a week or so. And the suture would be loose enough to allow him to still pass a urate. Of course, Batman hadn't eaten, for a good month because, we don't feed much while we're breeding. Unfortunately, when I woke up in the morning, there the hemipene was again, fully prolapsed again. So at that point, when I contacted the emergency vet, they said, at this point, I really think it's time to take him into, the emergency veterinary hospital. So, I don't live all that far from Tufts University, and they do have an exotics vet area in their small animal hospital. So here's another thing that it's really important to have when you're, if you own boas or snakes, is you should have a way to transport your snakes safely to the hospital. In my case, I had a nice cooler bag, which was, it's like a thermos bag, and I have plastic sterilite tubs that fit in this cooler bag. And so I placed him in the sterilite tub with moist paper towels. So, he was cushioned in there with some, moisture to prevent him, his hemipene from drying out and hopefully to protect it. And I put him in there, in the cooler and zipped it up, put my safety seatbelt on the cooler bag and rushed him up to the hospital where they saw him right away. My emergency vet had phoned in emailed the information in from seeing him, what the medications were that she had given him. And at that point, they took him back and examined him, and they gave me 3 options. One was that they could try to replace the prolapse, but the risk was that he could do the same thing, that it could come out again. And at that point, the prognosis was, basically that we would end up in position 2, which is we would have to amputate the hemipene. That the tissue could become necrotic, injured, and we would have to amputate it. The third option was that they could perform an open surgery, which they have never done before, but they have read about it in some books, and there were no guarantees. And that could potentially also harm his other hemipene. Snakes have 2. So, in order to do the right thing for Batman, which, I want nothing more than to do the right thing for my Boas, I decided the right thing to do for him was to have that one prolapsed hemipene amputated, preserve the hemipene that hadn't prolapsed, and, put him on the path to recovery. He's out for the year as far as breeding. In 2 years, he should be back good to go. And he is recovering very nicely. He's in a hospital enclosure here. He's getting antibiotic shots every 3 days. He's being a perfect patient. He did get pain medication for 3 days. I think it was Ketaphen. And he's getting cephalexin for antibiotics. And you can see he's feeling great. And there is no swelling, no inflammation around the tail area. You can see his hemipene area the cloacal area looks really good. And I'm very pleased with his recovery and the treatment he received. So that's the story in a nutshell. It was pretty stressful, but it looks like he's going to make it out the other side, with one hemipene less to tell the story. So anyway, that's the update, and I hope you all found it educational. And this is Lisa from Bensons Boas. Talk to you soon.